To begin the selfie swap portrait assignment, grid your 5x7 photograph every 1 inch. Slide your ruler up to the top of the photograph and mark at each inch. Then slide your picture over and measure every inch on either side. Slide your ruler down. And then make your grid lines. It's important that you get a real accurate grid on your photograph and on your drawing paper, because if it's not accurate, it's going to throw your drawing off. You don't have to use the gridding method when you do drawings, but it does help some people to get a better likeness of their subject. I always like to use a grid whenever I am drawing a portrait of somebody. If I'm drawing a landscape or something that's more forgiving, I might not use a grid. The next step after you've created your grid is to number it. Number it 1 through 5 across and 1 through 7 down. Next, you should be working on a 12 by 16 inch piece of drawing paper, and on this piece of paper you're going to make a 2-inch grid. This grid has to be drawn very lightly because in the end you're going to be erasing all your grid lines. So very lightly, line your ruler up at the edge of the paper and do little tick marks at every 2 inches. Slide your ruler down and do the same thing at the bottom of the paper. Then slide your paper over and repeat the process on the other 2 sides. Very lightly create tick marks at every 2 inches. Make sure to start with your ruler lined up at the edge of your paper. Here I'm placing the ruler about halfway along the paper on one of my tick marks, and I'm very lightly drawing a line halfway through and then doing my 2-inch tick marks along that line. This is just because I'm using a short ruler and I want to be sure that my measurements line up. Next, go ahead and draw your grid lines really super lightly on your drawing paper. Remember, you're going to be erasing your grid lines at the end, and you don't want to turn in a drawing that has grid lines showing. Now that we have our grid made, it's important that you also number your drawing paper just how you numbered it on your photograph. So numbering 1 through 5 across the top and 1 through 7 down the side. You will have an extra row and column of squares because the paper's cut a little bit bigger in order to give you a little bit of a border, so that you're not drawing your portrait right up to the edge of your paper. So you're going to have a little extra on the side and on the bottom. Now I'm ready to start drawing the portrait. I'm going to begin with the bigger shapes first. I'm going to start with the big outline shapes of my portrait. I'm looking at square 2, 3 on my photograph, and then finding square 2, 3 on my drawing paper, and I'm simply drawing what I see in the corresponding square. It's kind of like putting together a puzzle. Go really slow and let your eyes follow the outline shape of your portrait. Additionally, it's really important to begin this process with very light lines. Remember, we're trying to, one of the objectives with this drawing is to create a sense of form, three-dimensional form with shading and different values and smooth gradation. If we draw our portraits with really dark outlines, it's going to make our portraits appear flat. And one of the big goals with this assignment is that we make our portraits appear to be three-dimensional. Remember, this video is sped up. In real life, I'm going really slow, taking my time, and remembering to draw lightly. Now that I'm ready to start the detail of Miss Tansey's face, I am breaking up the 1-inch square into half-inch squares. So I'm taking my ruler and I'm doing little tick marks at half-inch in a couple of squares, specifically the ones where I see her eyes, because I'm breaking down the space a little bit more, and then I'm going to break down the space a little bit more on my drawing paper so that I can really make sure that I'm getting the placement of her facial features and the shape of her facial features correct. So now I'm going over to my drawing and I'm very, very lightly breaking down my 2-inch grid squares into 1-inch. So I'm measuring at breaking them down in half with tick marks really lightly in the 2 squares where her eyes are. Since I have broken down these 2 squares, I'm already noticing a correction. On the side of her face, I need to bring in the curve a little bit more. So this method of breaking down your grid squares for specific areas is really helpful. Now that I've finished drawing the outline really lightly of everything, I'm ready to start shading. Since I'm left-handed, I like to start shading on the right side of my surface first and then move my hand across. That way I'm less likely to smudge. I'm starting with her hair, and I am kind of doing linear kind of strokes, and I'm trying to make it appear to be the texture of hair. So I'm not smoothing it out just yet. I'm kind of leaving it in a controlled kind of linear outlined look. I'm kind of erasing my grid lines that are in the lighter areas as I go. Notice how when I'm shading her hair, I'm using curve lines. I'm pushing down hard in some areas and I'm lifting up my pressure in some other areas to get that range of values that I see and I know are there in her photograph. Use a scratch piece of paper to lay down over your drawing while you're working on your shading to keep it covered so that you don't get unwanted smudge marks and blur the lines of your drawing. This is a great practice when you're drawing something to keep your drawing clean and tidy. I'm using my finger to smudge around some graphite for her skin tone that's really light. Notice I'm not using my pencil directly to shade her skin. Also, I'm using little hatch marks to draw in her eyebrows and erasing as I go. Next, I'm going to show you a blending stump here. I am going to sharpen and clean my blending stump by rubbing it along a piece of sandpaper, a medium grit sandpaper, until it becomes clean. Blending stumps are great for smudging graphite in areas that are really small and your finger is too big to smudge. Blending stumps come in various sizes and can usually be found in any art supply store. Also, near the blending stumps in an art store, you'll find an object that looks like this. It's a board that has sandpaper on it that's for your blending stumps. Another technique that you might want to consider while you're drawing your portrait is laying down some graphite on a scratched piece of paper and then picking it up with a blending stump and smudging it around on your drawing. This is good for areas that need to be really light and you might not want to put your pencil directly down on the paper. So the blending stump, as you can see, is good for smudging real small areas like corners of eyes and other parts of the face. Regular erasers create eraser crumbs. This here is a kneaded eraser. I'm going to pick off a little piece of this kneaded eraser. As you can see, you can smush it around, you can knead it to clean it, you can pinch it to create a point, so you can get different shapes that for erasing. And the great thing about a kneaded eraser is that it doesn't create any eraser crumbs. So that way you don't have to wipe your drawing and risk the chance of smudging your graphite around. Kneaded erasers can be found in any art store in the art supply section, and they generally cost about 50 cents to $1 each. Drawing teeth can be tricky. Instead of outlining teeth with your pencil in a smile, instead try going through and shading the lights and the darks. So I'm looking really closely at my photograph and I'm shading the dark areas. Notice how when I do teeth, I mostly use a blending stump and not the pencil. So I'm laying down some graphite on the corners of the smile where it's really shadowed on the edges. And notice how you can't really see Miss Tansey's lips. That's because the outline is ever so lightly done, because her lips are just mostly values, real light values. So again, instead of outlining the teeth and outlining her lips, I'm really looking closely at and following the values and the shadows.